Hey y'all, thanks for tuning in to Outdoor and Door Texan. Today we're going to be making sticky St. Louis ribs on the big green egg. Now sticky ribs are those mythological backyard barbecue pork ribs, where your face is all slathered in sauce, each bite is a smoky, sugary bit of goodness, and every guest leaves stuffed silly and begging for the recipe. First thing you'll need, a rack of St. Louis style spare ribs. You can use baby back ribs if that's all you're able to find, but those meatier spare ribs tend to work best with this recipe. First thing you're going to want to do when prepping your ribs is to remove the membrane that runs along the underside of the rack. Now take a butter knife and wiggle your way under the membrane, pulling it away from the rib bones. Once you've got enough of the membrane separated, use a paper towel or dish rag to grab a hold of it and start pulling while slowly working your way down the ribs. It should come off in one or maybe sometimes two pulls. Removing the membrane will help that underside of your ribs get more penetration from both rub and smoke. This is another one of those hotly debated barbecue things, but I've had good results when I take the membrane off, so let's just stick with what works. I keep it fairly simple when it comes to trimming pork ribs. I look at the ends of my rack and just take off any meat that sits in front of that first bone. This will square up your rack for presentation points, and if you're worried about waste, you can also just toss that bit in the smoker along with your ribs as a chef's treat for later. Another quick trim I did on this particular rack was removing a bit of excess meat and fat that were sitting over the rib ends. Again, this just looks better trimmed, but it also will help me see the meat separate from the rib bones while it's cooking, which is a big indicator for doneness when you're smoking ribs. With the trimming done, it's time for a base coat of rub. I'm using Musket Powder Red Label, which I've been a huge fan of lately. If you've watched any of my other barbecue videos, you've probably seen me use this rub before. The Red Label in particular marries really well with pork, and I'll make sure to leave a link in the description below for anyone looking to get their own bottle. This is not a paid sponsor, I'm just a big fan. If you don't have that rub though, any pork rub will work. Just look for something with salt, pepper, sugar, garlic powder, paprika, cayenne, or some combination of those ingredients, and you'll be in the clear. I like to use yellow mustard as a binder for my rub when working with pork ribs. This won't affect the flavor in any way, but it will help keep that rub stay in place. After putting on the rub, I like to set the ribs back in the fridge for an hour or so to let that rub set in, and give it a head start on penetrating the meat. While your ribs are hanging out in the fridge, this is a good time to get your smoker fired up. I'll be smoking these ribs on my big green egg today, and for those of y'all also using green eggs, I'm smoking indirect with the plate setter legs up and using my trusty water pan. Regardless of what smoker you're using though, the temp will be at 225, and I'm using a mix of oak lump charcoal and apple wood chunks. If your smoke looks like this, you're not ready to put your ribs on, even if you're at the desired temperature. This is a common mistake I've seen with guys new to barbecue, and I wanted to quickly cover it while we prep the egg for our ribs. Thick white smoke will leave your meat bitter and powerfully over smoky in a bad way. Wait for this sweet blue colored smoke. Although it seems like it wouldn't do much, this is actually the ideal smoke color for barbecue. Alright, back to ribs. Your smoker is sitting solid at 225 and you're seeing sweet blue smoke, so it's time to take the ribs out of the fridge and get this cook started. For this recipe, we'll be smoking these ribs in phases. There's the extremely popular 3-2-1 method you may have heard of before, which is smoke 3 hours, wrap in foil 2 hours, and then unwrap in sauce for 1 hour. We'll be doing something close to this, probably more of a 2-2-1, but it really all depends on what you're seeing throughout the cook and how done your ribs are looking. Don't get hung up on a rigid time constraints with barbecue. For most cooks, it's about internal temp instead of time, but with ribs specifically, it's all about visual cues. As a good starter, we're going to leave these ribs smoking for 2 hours, then come back and check on them. Okay, so it's been about 2 hours and it's time to check on your ribs. You can see the meat is starting to draw away from the rib bones and the smoke is giving everything a nice light bark. Let's take these back to the kitchen and get them prepped for the wrap phase. Place your ribs on a few sheets of tinfoil where you'd be able to wrap them tightly within. Take a spoonful of brown sugar, or if your grocery store's baking section is empty as mine, regular sugar, and sprinkle over the ribs. Now take some parquet squeezed margarine and spread a few lines across the meat. Like the sugar, if you can't find that specific blue bottle, regular pats of butter or other margarine will do just fine. Finally, I'm spreading 2 types of honey over the meat. The first is a local raw honey, and then the second is a garlic infused honey, which I actually make at home. If all you have is that squeezed bear, that also is totally fine. Now, flip the rack over so your meat is down in that mixture and tightly pack the tin foil around the ribs. Place your packet of ribs on the smoker, still at 225 degrees, and let it sit for another 2 hours. It's been another 2 hours and it's time to check on these wrapped ribs. What we're looking for during the wrap phase is more signs of the meat separating away from the rib bones. These look good to me, where you can just make out at the bottom of the rack all those bones are peeking out. A quick word of caution: if you wrap your ribs too loosely in foil, or even just leave a tightly wrapped one on the smoker too long, the meat can get steamed, which will lead to a sloppy, pulled pork, fall off the bone kind of thing that we really don't want for this recipe. Let's throw these ribs back on the smoker, facing up, and make sure to save the foil drippings so that you can pour it back over your ribs as a quick baste. For this last phase, I increased my heat up to 250 or so. This will help caramelize the sauce we're about to brush on our ribs. Speaking of, grab yourself a bottle of your favorite sweet barbecue sauce. Safest bet is something Kansas City style, or anything saying molasses, honey, or well, sweet on the bottle. Stay away from anything vinegar based. Now we're just going to brush our ribs with sauce and then let them smoke for 15-minute intervals before applying another coat. The heat will caramelize the sauce and thicken it up over time, which will give us that sticky consistency. You're done when you think you're done. I typically give my ribs 3 coats of sauce with 15-minute breaks in between, but you can pull after 1 coat or go well far beyond 3. Just don't let the heat get high enough to burn the sugar in your sauce, which would ultimately ruin all of the work we've done to this point. Once you're happy with your sauce, it's time to take them back inside for cutting and eating. Another great visual cue on ribs being done is the bend test, which you can see right there. You want those ribs to absolutely flop over from your tongs, but not to be so overcooked that they tear away with gravity. Now the only thing left to do is cut your ribs up and enjoy the fruits of your labor. If time hasn't quite worked out and you're waiting for the party to arrive still, or something else is preventing you from digging in, just cover that pan in foil and set it in the oven on warm. It should be fine for a bit. Another visual cue I'm checking for here is that smoke ring. It's the pink line that runs around the outer edge of the meat. That shows me that there was good penetration of both smoke and spices during the cook. And finally, it's time for that first bite. This is your final quality check before serving, and of course the big payoff. If you've followed this recipe closely, it should be a pretty good one. Now that is exactly what I'm looking for in a good rib bite. The meat is cooked enough where it tears away easily, but it's not so overcooked that it's falling off the bone. Still has a little snap, and thanks to all your hard work, it's delicious. That'll do it for this recipe, and I hope y'all enjoyed it. Thank y'all as always for watching, and please let me know in the comments below how your ribs turned out. If you like what you see, please make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more great content to come. All right, y'all, take care.